Hi again then guys, and welcome to a Forza Horizon 3 straight line performance tune setup. And this particular vehicle is one of my favourite JDM cars. I'm a huge fan of Mazda rotary vehicles, be it the RX-7, the RX-8, the RX-3, various others as well, both in road and racing forms. And the RX-8 has always appealed to me in that it's one of the most genuinely usable convergences between a sports car and a genuinely practical daily driver. And it's still pretty much the only full-on, desirable four-door sports car. There are some four-door supercars or various others, but in the four-door sports car market, the RX-8 pretty much is the go-to vehicle. Now, as far as the tuning on this particular car, for the engine swap, I would recommend that 787B engine, the quad rotor. About time we use one of those in the tune. And for the drivetrain swap, I would recommend having all-wheel drive. Now, some JDM fans definitely won't want that, and that's fair enough. It doesn't affect your top-end performance too much, but of course it makes you a little bit slower off the line, off-road, not necessarily quite as good. So it depends what you want. If you want it to be more of a drift machine purely for the tarmac, then you don't necessarily need all-wheel drive, but I would recommend it for launch in particular. It gives you, of course, extra grip for the front end, and in particular if you do go on the dirt with the car, which chances are you probably will, given that it is a free-roaming game, I would recommend having it. So it's down to personal preference. As far as the rest, of course you want to increase the power, make the car as light as possible, all that kind of stuff. The visuals are purely down to you. If you like what I've done to the car visually, you can find this exact setup on my storefront. So just use the keywords in this video's description to be able to find that. But as far as the tuning side of things, and also of course the benchmark, according to the game, the specs which we're running are a 2.5 second 0 to 60 time, almost a 5.5 second 0 to 100 time, both of which are pretty good given that it's got less than half the power than many of the other cars that we're working with. And the top speed for its power is very good as well. 236 miles per hour isn't as quick, of course, as something like a full-on 1500 horsepower supercar, but in its own way, that's pretty quick. It's very quick, in fact. Now, as far as the gearbox, I would recommend a final drive of 3.9, then individual gears of 2.9, 2, 1.5, 1.17, 0.95 and 0.78. As far as alignment, I've got neutral camber and toe. You might want to change that, you know, get a bit of stance in there, especially with rear-wheel drive. So again, it's down to personal preference. 4 degrees of caster. You could go a bit higher if you want to stiffen it up, a bit lower to increase the tail happiness of the car at lower speeds. Anti-roll we've got on 30 and 20, springs on 152 and 173, and I've opted for the lowest ride height. As far as dampers, we've got those on 13 and 6, aero doesn't apply, and as far as the diff, I've opted for 100% on acceleration, 0 on deceleration, but feel free to mess around with that. If you already know a setup that works better for you personally, feel free to go ahead with that. And for the centre split, pretty tail happy. In the case of this car, 80% in favour of the back. But having that 20% of power and torque going to the front does make a big difference. Off the line you get going so much quicker, especially with such a rev-happy engine like that quad rotor that we're running, and it just makes a world of difference off-road as well. So that's it for the tune, which as I said you can find on my storefront, or you could use the tutorial. But now let's actually take it out on the street to see what it can do. Now, as I mentioned, the fact that you are running just over 700 horsepower compared to the over 1500 horsepower that many of the other cars that I would usually tune are running, you'd expect the performance to be slower, and it is. It's around, say, 20 to 30 miles per hour slower than many of the supercars in the game. But given that it's running less than half the power, that is nothing to be ashamed of. And the RX-8 is one of those vehicles, at least for me, that is more of a speciality car as far as when and where you choose to use it. It's not a car which is necessarily needed to win any particular race, but it's a car that's just nice to use. If you're a fan of the car, of course, it goes without saying. Overall though, if you do decide to use this build, I hope you have a lot of fun with it, of course, and regardless of whether you choose to use the tutorial or the storefront tune, either way, I hope you enjoy using it. But that's it for this tune overall. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, Thanks for watching.